Welcome to American Catholic History. If you like our podcast, be sure to rate us and give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Today we're talking about one of George Washington's Catholic Irish immigrant aides-de-camp, John Fitzgerald.
Yes, Washington relied on a number of Catholics for success in the Revolutionary War. He had at least two Catholic aides-de-camp, Stephen Moylan and John Fitzgerald. Plus there was a Polish cavalry officer, Casimir Pulaski, the Irish naval genius, John Barry, and of course the indispensable Frenchmen, Lafayette, Rochambeau, and Admiral de Grasse. Without the contribution of any one of them, really, the revolution may well have failed.
Now, in this episode, we're focusing on just the one, John Fitzgerald. He wasn't a brilliant field commander, and he didn't innovate something new for America, but he was a loyal friend of Washington. He played an important role in some of very important parts of the war effort. And one, he helped to quash an effort to discredit Washington and have him removed from command.
And what's interesting is that all of this was done at a time when Catholic Mass was still, outlawed in most of the 13 colonies, and Catholics were largely treated as second-class citizens.
Well, it shows how much hope Catholics placed on the promise of religious liberty that they saw in this new nation. And it shows how much confidence these Catholics placed in the man, George Washington.
Yeah, it really does. In the context of the time, this is a rather remarkable thing.
Now, we don't really know anything about John Fitzgerald before he came to America. We know he was born and raised in Ireland in County Wicklow, which is just south of Dublin, but we're not sure what year he was born.
Yeah, when we meet him in earnest, he is a merchant in Alexandria, Virginia at the end of the 1760s. He clearly brought enough money and education with him to be able to establish a successful mercantile business in short order and to rise in the ranks of high society. By the early 1770s, he was good friends with George Washington.
Yeah, or maybe he just brought enough Blarney with him.
Yeah.
Well, right.
It counts for a lot.
Well, and yes, he was good friends with Washington, and this makes sense because Washington at this point was a successful plantation owner and one of the wealthiest men in Virginia. His home, of course, was Mount Vernon, just a few miles south of Alexandria and right on the Potomac River. So Washington and Fitzgerald would have had business reasons to be acquainted, if nothing else.
Then, in April 1775, up there close to where you grew up, the shot heard round the world was fired and the Revolutionary War broke out. In June of 1775, George Washington went to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress, where he became General Washington and was given command of the Continental Army.
John Fitzgerald, by this time, had already been commissioned an officer in the Fairfax County Independent Company.
Hey, he was Irish. Tensions were mounting with the British Crown. Of course he was itching for the fight before anything was official. So when the fight officially broke out, he was ready.
He was, and he was commissioned a captain in the 3rd Virginia Regiment of the Continental Army. During the Battle of Harlem Heights, the major who was the commanding officer of the 3rd Virginia Regiment was killed, and Fitzgerald was promoted to that post. But he didn't remain there long. A few weeks later, General Washington was in need of an aide-de-camp, and he tapped his old friend, John Fitzgerald.
Washington had about 32 aides-de-camp throughout the Revolutionary War, with at least 3 serving concurrently at any point. Aides-de-camp had to be men whom Washington could trust implicitly, men who would be present with him nearly all the time, who could copy orders and deliver them to commanders on the battlefield, and who could be trusted with the most sensitive correspondence. Any man named an aide-de-camp was made a lieutenant colonel in the Army, with the head of the staff being a full colonel.
But for Washington, it wasn't only men. His wife, Martha, also accompanied George Washington at times and acted as an unofficial aide-de-camp. So, the women got in there too.
Yeah, there were probably some things that women were able to discover and find out that the men would not be able to.
Yeah.
Go around and do things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is not about Washington. It's about Fitzgerald. So just briefly, Washington had a lot of women who were working for him as spies too.
That's true. Yes.
But the official aide-de-camps for Washington, or aides-de-camp as I should say, were the ones who did do the dangerous duties that they needed to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those were the men.
Those were the men.
Yeah.
That's true.
And but it's no surprise that Martha would fill that role, at least somewhat, George himself said of what the position meant and required, aides-de-camp are persons in whom entire confidence must be placed. It requires men of abilities to execute the duties with propriety and dispatch, where there is a multiplicity of business as must attend the commander-in-chief of such an army as this. And persuaded I am that nothing but the zeal of those gentlemen who live with me and act in this capacity for the great American cause and personal attachment to me have induced them to undergo the trouble and confinement that they have experienced since they became members of my family.
And so it was, as a member of his family, that Fitzgerald traveled with and served George Washington beginning in March of 1776. He served ably on the battlefield at Trenton, Princeton, Brandywine, and Germantown. And then in late 1777, he was dispatched back to Virginia just as the army was beginning its winter encampment at Valley Forge, and he wouldn't rejoin the army until May of 1778. But while you may say, wow, how lucky for him that he avoided that brutal winter at Valley Forge, it may actually have been even more lucky for George Washington that John Fitzgerald was out and about, because Fitzgerald helped root out a political plot that was afoot to smear Washington's name and reputation so that another general could be made commander-in-chief of the Continental Army.
Yes, so what happened in this convoluted conspiracy was this. Brigadier General Thomas Conway was a general within Washington's army, and he thought that Major General Horatio Gates should be the general in charge, the commander-in-chief. He also thought that he, Conway, should be given a big promotion, naturally. So he instigated a gossip campaign among members of the Continental Congress about how poorly Washington was handling things, and he wrote a letter to Gates in which he said, among other things, "Heaven has been determined to save your country, or a weak general and bad counselors would have ruined it. What a pity there is but one Gates! But the more I see of this army, the less I think it fit for general action under its actual chiefs and actual discipline. I speak to you sincerely and freely, and wish I could serve under you."
I'm sure he sounded exactly like that.
No, according to recent research, he sounds more like a pirate.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, this letter was kept confidential by Gates, but Gates wasn't blessed with as trustworthy aides-de-camp as Washington. One of Gates' aides-de-camp, James Wilkinson, recited some of the really salacious bits from the letter to aides of another general, William Alexander. Alexander, for his part, sent a letter about what he knew to Henry Lawrence, who had taken over as president of the Second Continental Congress. Lawrence told Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald investigated the matter and wrote to Washington. Did you catch that entire game of telephone there?
Well, it was transmitted well enough that Washington was able to quash the Conway cabal once that letter, or whatever version of it, was exposed, and all those involved in it either resigned straight away or did so after being demoted.
That's true. It's the old line, an ounce of loyalty is worth a pound of cleverness. Washington inspired loyalty in Fitzgerald, and that mattered more than all the cleverness of Conway and company.
Yes, indeed. So Fitzgerald rejoined the army in Valley Forge in May of 1778, just as it was leaving that oh-so-important winter encampment, and he stayed with the army as they moved into New Jersey. But his time with the army wasn't to be long. At the Battle of Monmouth in late June of 1778, Fitzgerald was wounded severely enough that he had to leave the service and return to Alexandria.
His service to the cause of independence wasn't done, however. In April of 1781, months before the British surrender at Yorktown, a British raiding party was spotted on the Potomac approaching Alexandria.
Fitzgerald went into action and rallied as many local militiamen as he could find. He organized them in such a manner to seem like they were a much larger and more formidable lot than they really were. The British, who in reality vastly outnumbered the defenders, were successfully decoyed and did not land. He may have left the war, but the war didn't leave him.
Right. And another special thing, once he was back at home, he got married.
Yes, he did. With his war record and successful businesses, he was certainly among the most desirable bachelors in Alexandria. Every eligible maiden of Alexandria society had their eye on him. But there was a problem. None of them was Catholic. So instead, Fitzgerald married Jane Diggs, the daughter of a prominent Catholic Maryland family.
Jane Diggs' family owned Warburton Manor, which sat directly across the Potomac River from George Washington's Mount Vernon. Washington and the Diggs family were frequent guests at each other's homes over the years, so it's likely, very likely, that Fitzgerald met Jane Diggs through Washington. John and Jane married on January 2nd, 1779.
The war ended after the British surrender at Yorktown on October 19, 1781. After the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, General Washington formally resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, and he retired to civilian life at Mount Vernon. His old friend John Fitzgerald was certainly there to welcome him back to civilian life in Northern Virginia.
The two would work together a considerable amount over the ensuing years. Washington made Fitzgerald one of the directors in his Potomac Company, which was a private effort to cut canals along the Potomac River at points where rapids and waterfalls made navigation impossible. When Washington had to step down as president of the Potomac River Company, he named Fitzgerald to be his successor.
Then, when Washington became the first president in 1789, he tapped Fitzgerald to be the collector of customs at the port of Alexandria.
Now, this wasn't his first political governmental position in Alexandria. In 1786, he had been elected mayor of the city. Now, let's think about that. One of the most important cities in very Protestant Virginia elected a Catholic as mayor.
It's astounding. The Church of England had been the established church of the colony of Virginia, and the Catholic Mass was outlawed. Catholics gained more freedom with independence, but it wasn't until the state government adopted Thomas Jefferson's Statute for Religious Freedom in January of 1786 that Catholics gained full liberty. That act also ended the official establishment of the Church of England as the official state religion. Within that same year, Fitzgerald was elected mayor. That's how highly regarded he was.
And just 2 years later, another major milestone came about for Catholics in Virginia, and both John Fitzgerald and George Washington were right in the middle of this one, too.
Yes. In true Irish Catholic fashion, John Fitzgerald had a dinner at his home in Alexandria on St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1788. George Washington was in attendance, and a major topic of conversation was the construction of a Catholic church in Alexandria.
Yeah, up to this point, Mass was offered in various places, including Fitzgerald's own home at the corner of King and Fairfax Streets. Fitzgerald and others believed it was time for the growing Catholic population to have their own freestanding church building.
Well, George Washington agreed. And records indicate that at that dinner, George Washington himself made the first donation to support the project, an amount that would be more than $1,200 today. That led to the construction of St. Mary's Church, the first Catholic church in Virginia.
The original brick church was built in 1795, where the parish cemetery is now, down by the approach to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. At the time, this was just outside the city limits. But in just a few decades, they outgrew that one and built a new church on South Royal Street, much closer to the city center, and they built that in 1826.
That church still stands and was designated a minor basilica by Pope Francis in 2017.
Fitzgerald and Washington remained good friends throughout their lives, exchanging letters about all manners of subjects, from government policy and foreign relations to local matters in Virginia and business ventures.
In December of 1799, they died within 2 weeks of each other, Fitzgerald dying first, on December 2nd, and Washington dying on the 14th. Fitzgerald was buried with full military honors on his wife's family estate, which nowadays is Fort Washington Park.
While Mount Vernon endures, all that remains of Fitzgerald's property is a warehouse he built near the Alexandria Wharf. It stands at the corner of King and Union Streets in Old Town Alexandria, and today it houses a nice restaurant and a Starbucks.
He actually bought the land for that warehouse in early 1778 when he was on leave from the Continental Army while they were at Valley Forge. The land it sits on was actually mudflats at the time along the river, but the land was raised so he could build the warehouse. At the time of its construction, it was right on the Potomac, but over time more of the riverbank was filled in part to accommodate larger ships which had to stay in the deeper water.
And that's the story of a little known but very important Irish Catholic man who was a close friend of George Washington. He didn't write important documents, lead men in decisive battles, or single-handedly establish enduring institutions. But his friendship, his steadfastness, his reliability and loyalty, his business acumen, and his Catholic faith all made contributions that helped to shape the new United States of America. This has been American Catholic History. If you enjoy American Catholic History, please become a supporter. Get information on how to become a supporter at americancatholichistory.org/support.
Also on our website, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about John Fitzgerald and about our pilgrimages, and find other great stories from American Catholic history.
We also love the great reviews our listeners leave. Those and the 5-star ratings help others find us. You can email us feedback, questions, tips for episode topics, or other comments at feedback@americancatholichistory.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/AmericanCatholicHistory, on Instagram at ACH_podcast, and follow us on X at ACH1513. I'm Noelle Hister-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Thank you once again for joining us on American Catholic History, made possible by listeners like you.